Hi and welcome into the game of the century played by Robert James Fischer. The first interesting fact about this game is the fact that Fischer was only 13-year-old at that time. Yet he played really brilliant game which became his most famous game and even is considered to be the game of the century. Another thing is that this game has been analyzed by more than a few authors, but I noticed that very often their analyses were somewhat misrepresenting. And even when I read the book of Garry Kasparov, my great predecessors about Fischer, I noticed that he somewhat tried to criticize Fischer and rather present him in a negative manner. I'm not sure why this happened, but maybe it is just that Kasparov feels envy towards Fischer, because whenever chess players are asked who is the greatest chess player of all time, usually these two guys appear on the top positions. Anyway, so my goal for this lesson is just to show you the real situation about this game and also to highlight a few tips about the techniques used by Fischer in his games so that you can imitate his style and play the same tricks in your own games. So let's go ahead and get started. The game is played between Donald Byrne and Bobby Fischer, where Fischer is black. So the game started with knight to f3, knight f6, c4, g6. Here there is the first interesting moment that I'd like to highlight. Fischer really loved to play that fianchetto type of positions against the closed openings. So whenever white played the first moves c4 or d4, Fischer really loved to fianchetto his kingside bishop, and that has been his main opening weapon for many years. So if you'd like to imitate his style, you can also employ his opening style. Here white played bishop f4. I don't comment on the opening moves that much. In the opening, both sides are just bringing their pieces into play. There could be various ways how this can be done, it's just different opening lines. Anyway, if we talk about the Fischer's opening preference, in this position he chosen either d6 with a King's Indian defense, and in this case if black plays d6, then in the future his plan is usually to prepare the e5 advancement in the center. So that was one idea of Fischer, and another idea is what happened in the game. He played d5 with a Grunfeld defense, where black is counter-attacking white in the center directly. White played queen b3 to protect his c4 pawn and also to put more pressure on black's pawn. So black exchanged the pawns, and now at the moment the black's c7 pawn being attacked. Black needs to do something about that, and he played pawn to c6. White answered e4 to occupy the center, and now he's really solid there. Okay, let me ask you the first question. How would you play here as black? What do you think? One of the popular lines nowadays is to start pushing the b pawn, to play b5, attacking the white's queen, and also black maybe will keep pushing the pawn forward to attack the white's knight as well. So in this way black tries to start the aggressive actions straight away. However, Fischer took a different approach, and here I'd like to highlight this rule. While playing games, Fischer always tried to make sure that his piece is active. He almost never had any bad piece, unlike other players. And that's why in this position he noticed that his pieces of the king side have already been developed, while the pieces on the queen side are still on their initial positions. And that's why he needed to move them out. And that's what he did. He avoided unnecessary and unclear complications, but just brought his pieces into play. So firstly he developed the knight. So the knight goes to b6, attacking the white's queen. The queen has to go away. By the way, I've noticed that some commentators said that this was the awkward move of the queen to c5, and it's one of the reasons for the white's loss. Hopefully you understand that it's not true, because normally whenever you have a choice you need to move your pieces forward. So queen c5 is totally okay. White lost the game because of his further mistakes. Black played bishop g4, so he continues to bring the pieces into play. And here white really made a mistake. He played bishop g5, It is widely known that you shouldn't move a single piece twice in an opening, and yet white did that. Probably he wanted to put some indirect pressure on the e7 pawn, so in case black moves away his knight from f6, white will be able to take the pawn on e7, and maybe white was hoping that it will restrain black's possibilities, but anyway it is wrong. And at this point, if you compare the white's position and the black's position, you will notice that black has already castled and developed all his minor pieces, while the white's king is still in the center and his kingside pieces are still on their initial positions. That's what I was talking about before, that Fischer has always made sure that all of his pieces are active. Okay, so we know there is something wrong with the white's position. How to punish white for his mistake? How to exploit black's advantage in development? Well, firstly, please try to think about that yourself and try to guess the black's next move. It's really amazing and surprising move, but anyway, you can give it a try and try to find that yourself. By the way, I noticed that different commentators explained the following black moves just by the fact that Fischer is a genius player and that's why he plays powerful moves. But I think this is exaggeration. At that time, Fischer was only 13-year-old, and at this tournament he lost a few games and I think took only the 8th place. So it would be exaggeration to say that Fischer was just so strong at that time, so genius, and whatever he did was so great. Anyway, let's try to think more practically and decide how can you find such attacking moves. And the rule is very simple. You need to focus your attention on the white side of the board and think how you can move there and attack your opponent. If you look at the position from this perspective, you will find the following move pretty simple because there are only a few ways how black can possibly move to the white's half of the board. So it is the move knight to a4. Black is trying to deflect the white c3 knight, which is currently protecting the e4 pawn. And in case white really accepts the sacrifice and takes the knight, black will take with his knight on e4, making a double attack on the white's queen and bishop. And it's very difficult to save all the hanging pieces of white. For example, if white just simply moves his queen backwards, something like this, then really black can take the bishop on the g5. So first we can eliminate the defender of the bishop, the knight, and then knight takes g5. Now black took back the piece. In the meanwhile, he also won the central pawn on the e4, the white's position is destroyed, and black is totally winning. So let's make a few moves back. Okay, that position, let's say white decides to move the queen not backward but forward, and takes the pawn on the e7. What can black do in this case? In fact, there are a few ways for black to proceed, but one of them is the move queen a5, which is also very powerful. It's hitting the white king and the knight, and also putting extra pressure on the bishop. So it's a really multifunctional move. And white crumbles here, for example, after knight c3, if black trades the knights. Here there is a new problem for white after rook e8. White is losing the queen because of the pin. In the actual game, white refused to take the knight as he realized how harmful it is for him, and he simply retreated back with his queen. Now, after the exchange of the knights, the white's e4 pawn became unprotected, and black can simply capture it. White replied with bishop takes e7, attacking the queen, and queen goes away. Here there is another interesting situation where white once again could take some material, could win the exchange. Let's see what would happen in case white would really take that. Then black recaptures by the bishop because that attacks the white's queen. Therefore, white has to react, he has to spend time on making defensive moves. And after queen to b3, black could simply trade the queens and it is also advantageous for him. But there is another little combination, and it's again with the knight. And once again, if you focus your attention on the white's half of the board and think what damage black can do there, you can find the combination pretty easily. It starts from knight takes c3, and after queen takes, black can win the queen using the pin motif once again. This time it's bishop b4, and white is losing the queen. That's why for the second time in this game, white refused to take the material, And instead of taking opponent's rook, he played bishop c4. And generally this is certainly the right idea, because you need to develop pieces. Funnily enough, black anyway took that pawn with knight takes c3. This time the trick is slightly different, although we have seen a similar motif before. If white accepts this knight sacrifice, then after rook to e8, black will win the bishop using the same pin on the white's king. So black will take back the bishop, and he won the pawn on the c3, and therefore he'll just have advantageous position. So let's go back. After knight takes c3, white didn't take the knight, but he found quite a creative way to continue fighting. He played bishop c5. He wants to remove this bishop from eventual danger and then pick the black's knight in a calm position. However, Fischer was known as a guy who always was willing to go into complications, and in such complications his main idea was to try to refute the opponent's idea. And let's see how he did that in this case. So firstly, he played rook f to e8, so counter-attacking the white's king, and now the king has to move and therefore will be unable to castle anymore. And now black made another counter-attacking move, which is really brilliant, really shocking, because it seems like black has to move the queen somewhere, remove it from danger. But all of a sudden, he just left the queen right there and made a counter-attacking move. Can you find it? In fact, there are even two counter-attacking moves here. One is knight to b5, counter-attacking white's queen, but the move black played in the game is even stronger. He played bishop to e6. So I've told you that normally you need to go into the opponent's half of the board and make some damage there, but this move was exceptional in all the senses. Here black sacrifices a queen and is willing to counter-attack. Now let's see what happens if white takes one of the black's pieces. In case of queen takes c3, there is a really funny variation. Here black can recapture the white's piece using the pin, but this time the pin is different, it's the pin on the white's queen. So at the moment, black is a pawn up, and white cannot really capture any of the black's material, because the white's bishop is pinned by the queen, and the white's pawn is pinned by the bishop. So it's a very funny situation. Now let's come back. Here, if white tries to take not the knight, but to take that bishop on e6, there is another very famous tactical motif that you are probably aware about, or if not, you definitely need to remember it. It starts from queen b5, where black can deliver smothered mate. So then knight to e2 check, the only way that white can do is king to f1, then knight g3, it's double check with the knight and with the queen, that's why white has to move the king somewhere, and after king to g1, black can sacrifice the queen and deliver a smothered mate. This is a really famous tactical motifs which happens in different positions, therefore it's worth remembering. Now here is this critical point of the game where black played a brilliant move bishop to e6 with a devastating counterattack. White in the actual game just took the queen, and let's see what happened next. Black took the bishop with a check, so king has to move. And now there is another interesting tactical motif known as windmill or discovered attack, discovered check. So here after knight to e2 and king to f1, you can notice that black can make lots of moves with this knight while delivering a discovered check with the bishop. And there will be no way for white to do anything except for just moving his king. And that's why by using this windmill motif, black collected the d4 pawn and then moved the knight back to c3, where it attacks the white's rook on d1. So here you can notice that the situation is the same as it was a few moves ago, but with the difference that black took the d4 pawn of white. Okay, now here's another position, and once again you need to decide what to do. How would you play here as black? Would you take the white's rook on d1, or would you take the bishop? In the game, black decided to take the bishop, and this is definitely the winning move. And once again, I'd like to emphasize this Fischer's attitude towards the game. He always made sure that his every piece is active. and that's the idea that you really need to keep in mind while playing. While taking the bishop on the b6, black not only collects some material but also brings his rook into play. It starts to attack the white's queen, and now really all of the black's pieces are active. We cannot say the same thing about white, because his rook on the h1 is in the corner doing nothing. Oh, this position is already winning for black. White played queen b4, taking the bishop. Black replied with rook a4, protecting the bishop with a tempo. And after queen goes away, black simply took the rook, and now already black has the decisive material advantage. He has the rook and two bishops against the queen, and for queen, for single piece, it is impossible to fight against three powerful pieces of his opponent. So now black starts to collect the harvest, simply take everything in the white's possession. Rook takes e1, white made an intermediate check, and then took back the rook. And this is the last instructive moment in this game where I would like to ask you to think, how would you proceed here if you are black? Well, there could be different ideas. For instance, you have the passed pawns there, you can try to push them forward, create the new queen, or maybe you would like to keep attacking white's king somehow. Anyway, Fischer took a different approach. As we said before, his priority has always been to make sure that his every piece is active. And at the moment, although black has the decisive material advantage, his pieces are disorganized. The bishop on f8 is pinned, it cannot move. Now the other pieces are doing different job, they are not coordinated, they don't serve any single goal. And that's why, instead of just trying to push the pawns or attack the king, the first priority of Fischer was to coordinate his pieces to make sure all of them are active. He started this by putting his minor pieces in the center, so bishop played to d5 and then knight to e4. Now his pieces are centralized, protecting each other. It is impossible for white to create any counterplay. Then queen b8 taking the pawn, black removed it, and now after knight e5, black played king g7 to unpin his bishop, and now it's ready to go bishop d6, attacking all of the white's pieces and his king, and white is defenseless. He played king g1 to remove the king from the eventual pin, but he fall into mating net instead, and here black delivers a checkmate. Now let's summarize the two main techniques of Bobby Fischer that he used in this game to play such brilliant chess. The first thing is he always made sure that his every piece is active. If you keep this idea in mind while playing, you will never have bad pieces, and your game will be consistent, stable, and very strong. The second rule: you need to attack and move your pieces to opponent's side of the board. If you keep this algorithm for finding attacking moves in mind, you will find lots of brilliant tactical attacking moves, similarly with Bobby Fischer. So keep these rules in mind and play brilliant chess. If you want to test your skills and how well you digest this information, I've prepared one puzzle for you from another famous game of Bobby Fischer. You'll find a link to that puzzle below the video. Give it a try and test your skills. Thanks for watching.